So it's quite frightening to open that door and see all that. And that also associates you with the entire dark shadow of mankind, right? The satanic element of the human character. But it opens the door to understanding as well, to understanding how people can do terrible things, because you can see yourself as one of the people who can do terrible things. That's really useful, because then maybe you start to be motivated to be the sort of person who wouldn't do terrible things, if you can really come to terms with the fact that that's part and parcel of you. It also is in perverse sense, it's also a discovery of your own strength, though, because, if you have that desire for aggression, that desire for destruction, and that ability to fantasize in that aggressive manner, it also means that you can incorporate some of that into your speech and into your actions, so that you're a lot more immovable, right? And a lot more of a force to contend with. It can give you some respect for yourself when you realize that you're a force of destruction as well as creation. And then you're also more likely to treat yourself with a bit more intelligent caution, to know that part of you is a ticking bomb in some sense that could go off. And so you tread a bit more lightly around yourself, and maybe you encourage people to tread a bit more lightly around you as well, which isn't such a bad thing. And all the people that I really admire, that I know, have a clearly dangerous side, and you don't want to have that activated any more than necessary. But it's also what makes them respectable and strong, especially if they have that under control. So, that's a bit of a dialogue about shadow integration. It's a very challenging undertaking, to pull in that dark side of your character. And that would be all the things that you've repressed or failed to develop as a consequence of trying to be a harmless and, a harmless citizen who looks virtuous on the surface. That's the Jungian persona. And you need that, because everybody needs a mask that they wear in public, like a suit, so that we can tolerate seeing each other on the street. We don't have to look right into our depths every time we interact. We need that persona, but that has to be transcended. And the way to transcend that is to integrate the darker parts of the character. They're very useful. That aggression, that sexual demand, for example, all of it. That's very difficult to socialize, that competitiveness, but unbelievably useful in terms of force of character, if you can manage it.
All right, so in this video, we're going to cover shadow work in a little bit more detail, addressing a few different methods, tactics, I suppose you could say, and I'm trying to give more examples, more tangible, hands-on, practical examples. So let's get to it. In Psychology and Religion, Jung wrote, "Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. Furthermore, it is constantly in contact with other interests, so that it is continually subjected to modifications. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected." All right, let's talk about shadow work, but with some more tangible, practical examples. For starters, here's a quick refresher on shadow work and how to integrate your shadow. So integrating your shadow, first off, what does that even mean? It's basically just the process of becoming aware of the things in your unconscious that you've buried and turned a blind eye to, and ultimately allowing them to come out of the shadow in a healthy way, or at least a more healthy way, if that makes sense. Like allowing your aggression to come out in a healthy way as you work out at the gym, for example, or while you grapple or box, something along those lines. We'll get into a bunch of examples. These shadow aspects are the things about yourself that you were taught to hate, or that you've learned to hate, that you fear, things you choose to brush aside or outright ignore instead of facing the monster that is your shadow head on. And that's precisely what these shadow aspects are. They're monsters, or you could call them dragons. Some big, some small, but all dangerous. Some of the more common shadow aspects are sexuality, fetishes, rage, hate, sadness, laziness, and cruelty. But there are many, many others actually, and a lot of good things as well that can be hiding there, like boldness, assertiveness, various forms of love, a healthy sort of pride, etc. But how do you identify what's in your shadow? How do you become aware, and then how do you integrate those shadowy aspects of the mind? So here's one quick tip that I always default to. Pay attention to you and the things you do. Search out the concealed and observe all that you feel. If something enrages you or frightens you or arouses you or disgusts you, especially when it's so intense that it makes you look away or run or hide, that's your task. That's your opportunity. Because you just saw a monster, and since you're monster hunting, you need to track it down, confront it, and grapple with it until you have tamed it, so to speak. Until it is integrated and serving you and playing nicely with the rest of your archetypes or partial personalities, whatever you want to call it, for lack of a better term. That's the way that it should be. So how do you do that? Well, you need to become brutally honest with yourself, but balance that with a real and infinitely forgiving love for yourself. That's very hard to do, but necessary. No lies and no unnecessary harshness. Life is messy. It's okay to make a mess, and it's okay to do things badly, especially in the beginning. The fool precedes the master, after all. Remember, the shadow is you, and handled correctly, a vital, beautiful, and even powerful part of you. A force for good. So you have to be honest with yourself, balance that with love for yourself, and patience. This is another really big one. Be patient. You'll screw up, guaranteed. It's all part of the game. But keep at it, and you'll see slow and steady progress. The key thing is consistency. Listen to your shadow, but also remember that it's flawed. So let's say someone insults you and keeps insulting you to your face. The angry green Hulk of the shadow aspect that is your rage will say, beat him into a bloody pulp. And as your pride feeds into your rage like napalm, you briefly consider it, but you stop. And instead channel that anger into a well-placed word that diffuses the situation properly, or convinces your antagonist to back down without violence. Maybe it was a subtle threat of violence, or just a hint, and that was enough. And that tiny sliver of rage that you let out is also enough to keep those monsters happy, because that's all they wanted to begin with, for you to love and respect yourself enough to stand up for yourself. Alright, so here's another good one. Try active imagination, but you're going to have to try it a lot. It can take time to see progress here. If I remember, I'll link to my active imagination video here, or at least in the section below. But if I forget, please jog my memory and I'll put it there. Similar to active imagination in a lot of ways, of course, are dreams. Keep a dream journal. Again, consistency is everything. You'll remember more and more of your dreams if you stick with it. Keep it by your bed and write down your dreams as they come to you. And sketch, too, if you can. Later, you can do your best to interpret the dreams. And don't let yourself get bogged down by the sea of crappy dream interpretation websites that litter the internet. There's so many bad ones out there. To understand your dreams, stick with the most reputable sources. For me, that means Carl Jung and a few key Jungians like Marie-Louise von Franz and Robert A. Johnson, and also the more modern symbologist Jonathan Pageau and his brother. By the way, his book is very good. That's been key for me, so I strongly recommend that book. I'll link that below too, hopefully, if I remember. And then we have, all right, so we talked about the dream journal, but a lot of times I think people tend to overlook just having a normal journal, especially one dedicated to shadow work. So you can name the different parts of your psyche and let them talk as you write, if that makes sense. Remember, they're you. You're talking to yourself, but in a healthy way. This can be incredibly fruitful. Give it a shot. You'll probably be surprised with the results you get here. Now, one other thing really quick before we jump into some more examples from Jung. For integrating things like aggression and anger, the gym and the mat are your friends. Working out with free weights, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, judo, boxing, and other martial arts, working the heavy bag, any kind of difficult workout really. These are all amazing opportunities to channel aggression and even some anger in a healthy manner. Keep in mind, if you find yourself accidentally and unnecessarily hurting people on the mat when you're trying to channel rage, that might be your cue to stop. Try weightlifting instead, something along those lines, at least until you've learned to control it more and you can let it out in a healthier way. All right, here's some good stuff from Jung on the subject.
Of course, running through all your work, there are many of these ideas in the personal unconscious, the race unconscious, the self, the ego, the persona, the energy principles, such as we mentioned entropy and equivalence and so on, in a sense, the first and second law of thermodynamics, I believe that you suggest or allude to. And now, in trying to look at the whole person, of course, one is struck that you are trying hard to look at the whole person, that you don't want to look at these little parts of this person, but feel there's sort of a total future realization of the whole that may be very important. That you talk, for example, about a process of individuation, how this whole person emerges, if I'm not mistaken. Would you like to comment a little bit upon this process of individuation, this process, how all these factors move toward a whole, a totality?
Well, you know, that's something quite simple. Take an acorn,
Yes.
put it into the ground, it grows, and it becomes an oak.
Yes.
You see, that is man.
Yes.
Man develops from an egg
Yes.
and develops into the whole man.
Yes.
And that is the law that is in him.
When you read the Red Book, you get front row seats to the mind of Jung himself as he does shadow work. It's quite the ride, following Jung's inward journey through the abyss of his own unconscious. You can actually see during his active imagination work as he meets Philemon the serpent, his anima Salome, and many others, the development of this concept, the shadow, as well as examples of his own shadow work there. And perhaps not too surprisingly, some great advice. On pages 246 to 247, he writes about shadow work. He who enters into his own must grope through what lies at hand. He must sense his way from stone to stone. He must embrace the worthless and the worthy with the same love. A mountain is nothing, and a grain of sand holds kingdoms, or also nothing. Judgment must fall from you, even taste, but above all, pride, even when it is based on merit. Utterly poor, miserable, unknowingly humiliated, go on through the gate. Turn your anger against yourself, since only you stop yourself from looking and from living. The mystery play is soft like air and thin smoke, and you are raw material that is disturbingly heavy. But let your hope, which is your highest good and highest ability, lead the way and serve you as a guide in the world of darkness. Jung also said, I'd rather be whole than good. One way to interpret that is that it's better to be whole than it is to be good in the eyes of others, or even yourself, because there are many emotions, desires, actions, and traits that you may think are bad or harmful or evil that are actually very good and healthy when integrated properly, or let out of the shadow in the right doses and the right way at the right time.